CMPRadio.net. It's the station. CMPRadio.net, the voice of Chester.
Hey y'all, welcome to another episode of What's News Delco. I'm your girl and your host, Dyamond, joined by co-host
Lee with the T.
And tonight we're going to get into some very interesting conversations. We're being joined by Yeadon Police Chief Henry Giammarco and the Hood Abolitionist Sergio Hyland. So we're going to continue the conversation from last month's episode just on juvenile detention. And recently, there have been 2 community meetings hosted by the Department of Juvenile Justice Services and Rehabilitation, as well as just the Delaware County Council, which are also their board members of this entire juvenile detention board. And they came out to Darby and Chester. And let me tell you, those were some very interesting conversations. And a lot of the residents did come out, especially out in Chester. They were very stable with their thoughts on where they stand with this juvenile detention in general. Not great thoughts, if I'm being honest, as they shouldn't be, because we know at the end of the day, our black and brown youth are going to continue to be targeted, and that's not what we need. So we're going to dive into some details just about how those community meetings went, because Miss Maleata, last time I checked, I think Monica Taylor chased you out of that Chester building.
Oh, yeah. So with the meetings, the one in Darby, not as many community members came out, but there was also a huge event going on the same day. So a lot of parents were there with their children. But even still, the tone from the community has been that we don't want a detention center. We need money for programs and resources that focus on prevention so kids don't end up in a facility in the first place. Some of the board members try to spread false narratives and half-truths, which wasn't very helpful because it creates more confusion. So a lot of the community still isn't clear on what's taking place. The meeting that took place in Chester was a lot more people in attendance, but pretty much the majority of the room was still the same vibe. We need help for our children today. We need to focus on prevention, making sure kids don't get in trouble in the first place. And why aren't we having a conversation about that? And people also want to know how come they didn't have public meetings to speak with the community when they were deciding to reopen this facility in the first place. So there's a lot of mistrust going on right now. I did publicly call out Monica Taylor in the meeting, as well as Kevin Madden, for the behaviors they've displayed, and Monica did chase me out of the meeting. And she just let me know that as far as helping the kids and helping the schools, that's usually not a county thing, and that they do have the Department of Human Services focusing on mental health, which is why they were able to reduce crimes in Chester by, what is it, 67%?
They said over 60%.
And we spoke about helping schools fund programs like Safe Corridors to get into their buildings to help with the children. And she hit me with a lot of political BS that I wasn't really feeling. I know that she's up for re-election, so I'm sure that played a huge part in her speaking to me. But we'll see. We'll see what they're going to do. David Irizarry, who is the superintendent of juvenile detention and rehabilitation services, does seem to be in alignment with the fact that you need to focus on prevention and programs and resources. So that does give some comfort, but the board is very problematic. They don't seem to really understand the needs of the community that they are supposed to be serving, which is wild to me. And honestly, a lot of them seem to lack empathy, and they seem to not really care about children, which is also alarming, especially when some of them are Black and are parents. So that's where it's at right now. I feel very frustrated that they are asking for feedback, but they don't seem to be actually listening. And they are supposed to be circling back around to Upper Darby, and Chester in the spring with more community meetings, and hopefully they'll advertise properly so that people actually know about them and know to come out. But we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Well, I feel like they made their narrative very clear. And Chief, you actually were at the Darby one, but the Chester meeting, they showed a very detailed PowerPoint about what the inside of the facility will look like. So they kind of displayed how the rooms that the kids will be in, they won't be like jail cages. They'll be like hotel rooms where they can have a nice view as to what's going on outdoors, and even connected to like a music studio. There will be a playground inside, including recreation services. So the narrative that they're painting is, if you actually want your kids to actually have access to these things, they're going to have to go through the system, and that's not okay. So of course the community was upset about that, because we're now wasting millions of dollars on services that shouldn't even be inside of a facility like that. We need them now, like Maleata said. And speaking of Monica Taylor, if I'm not mistaken, she's actually chair of the education board for Pennsylvania. So for her to say things like we actually can't put this money into schools, that's also another conflict of interest, because why are you even serving on this board? Like, where do you actually stand on serving kids of color? So before we dive into more details, I want the audience to know more about you guys. So, Chief, would you be interested in just sharing your background and just your general thoughts on a detention center like this?
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. My name is Henry Giammarco, and I'm the current police chief of Yeadon. Prior to coming to Yeadon, I served 21 years with the Pennsylvania Attorney General's office. Prior to that, I was a Philadelphia police officer. Prior to that, I was in a housing authority police officer. And then prior to that, I was in a warrant unit. So I've been in law enforcement for almost 28 years now. I can actually tell you every day I love going to work. This is a calling. It's great to be back in uniform. I miss the community aspect of policing. I'm big on community policing. I actually worked in the 25th district in Kensington, and I was involved with several programs. The one program that was the highlight of my career as a Philadelphia police officer was called the Youth Violence Reduction Program. Essentially what this program did is it partnered the police department with the violence network, anti-violence network, and also juvenile probation and adult probation. And we went out in the community and we interacted with the children, and from the age of 14 to 21, individuals were at risk, and we did a great job. And it was just something a program that I hold in high regard, and something I would honestly like to see in Delaware County. But it's great to be in Yeadon, and as my man Flavor Flav said, don't believe the hype. Yeadon's a great place. Yeadon is an excellent place. And I have to give props to the police department's been through hell over the last year. And it's getting there. And like I said, every day I love coming to work. And I thank you for inviting me. And with the juvenile, I was pretty shocked when I was at the Darby thing, and I believe it was like $42 million. Is that the current sticker right now without the government contracts, like $42 million?
We keep hearing different numbers. So we've heard as low as 36 and as high as 45. So somewhere in between the two.
Yeah, and I'm going to tell you, this is not the position of the Yeadon Council, not the position of the Yeadon Mayor, not the position of the Yeadon Police Department. This is my position, someone that's been in law enforcement for 28 years. You do need a place where violent individuals, no matter the age, will be held. but I can't see spending all that money, maybe $5 million, and then bring that money back to the communities. We need to, I'm telling you, we need a rec center in Yeadon, and I know that just from interacting with the schools. You need programs that are going to address the needs of the community. And that's something that, you know, I'm going to fight for as much as I can in my position that I'm allowed to fight for, but we need, and that's important to me.
Okay. Serge, so I see you just shook your head a little bit in regards to having some type of facility. So can you tell us more about you, your background, what it means to be an abolitionist? Because I know a lot of people actually aren't familiar with the term.
Okay. So my name is Sergio Hyland. Everybody calls me Serge on Instagram, on social media. I'm Uptown Serge, the hood abolitionist, and I'm 41. First of all, I want to say thank you for having me, first and foremost. I appreciate being here and, you know, even sitting next to a police chief, the closest, like I said earlier, that I've ever been to a police chief in a friendly way. But so I'm born and raised in Philadelphia. I went to prison at the age of 19. I was released a year ago at 41. And so I served about 22 years in prison, but prior to that, I served time in the juvenile system. So I'm a product of the juvenile placement system, and I'm an expert on this topic, actually. So as an abolitionist, what I believe is an abolitionist is a person who seeks to abolish systems of white supremacy and the structures that prop those systems up. And unfortunately, the police in America are one of those structures that prop the system of white supremacy up. Prison, juvenile facilities, detention facilities for so-called immigrants and other people are also some of those structures of oppression and violence and just a threat to our community. So there's nothing that anybody can say that would convince me that building a facility to cage juveniles and is a good idea, even the so-called violent people that you talked about earlier, because violence is a learned behavior, but you want to hold people accountable for doing the only thing that they know in most cases. So I don't support this facility that's being built, and I guess as we go along with this conversation, I can get into more of the reasons why I don't support it.
Well, thank you for that, Serge, aka Hood Abolitionist, because I didn't see you touch on that a little bit more. But Chief, you did mention earlier that you do think violent, behaviors should be stopped in some way, and that could mean that kids do need to be detained somewhere. So do you actually think that a facility like this could be effective in actually stopping or reducing any type of behaviors like that?
And just to be correct, Lima was a temporary holding area where if they were adjudicated, the juvenile was adjudicated or sentenced. So essentially they're there, and I mean, we discussed this, they might have like 5 weeks to 2 months possibly being held there until they go through their court process, correct? Is that normally how, that's the way my understanding of Lima was. They're not staying there the whole time. That's the way I understood Lima to be.
What I understood and understand Lima to be is just abusive, a traumatic space for a lot of kids to have been, and honestly, just the wrong staff members in that facility who aren't interested in stopping or reducing those behaviors, but increasing it in some way. So I honestly am not too sure about the length of time that a lot of individuals spent there. I just know the harm that came out of it. So just knowing that this facility could actually reopen and expand again and possibly have the same staff members in there yet again.
Yeah, that can't be. I mean, you can't, if the juvenile system does anything, it should rehabilitate and reform, not punish. And, and reading, not the whole grand jury report the Attorney General's office did, but skimming through it, some of it, it's horrific to read that. I mean, you don't treat human beings like that, and that's the problem, hiring, and there has to be real oversight in those types of facilities.
So do you think it would be effective if it did reopen?
I think, and I mean, we can disagree to disagree, but I'll give you a perfect example. A couple nights ago, a 14-year-old boy, I'm sorry, 15, I misspoke, 1:51 in the morning in Logan, outside in Philadelphia, is walking around with a gun. A lady coming from a gym, walking out, he robs her and he shoots and kills her. I don't want that person on the street. If you want to put an ankle bracelet and keep them in your house, that's fine. But I don't want the violent criminals on the street. I mean, keep him in there until he's adjudicated, until he can go to be placed, but also have a rehabilitation specialist and working with I believe the quote-unquote keyword now is informed trauma treatment, and actually working with individuals and then getting to the root of the problem. But until we get to the root of the problem, we're just going to keep going in this vicious circle, and we're just going to in a vicious circle. And we have to, from birth, I mean, we're supposed to be one of the best countries in the world, but from birth on, I don't understand why we don't take care of our children from as soon as they're born and have that system and almost the holistic approach to raising a child. I mean, that's the problem. I mean, we have children that are going home to houses where they don't have a father or they don't have a mother or they don't have structure, and we need to really worry about that. And we need to, from the youngest, to really get to the root of the problem. And these conversations can help. I mean, we're having dialogue and working it out. And, we might, as I told your organization when I met y'all, like, I might not agree with everything you say, but if we can talk and have an honest dialogue, we can work together to solve these problems.
I think that's an interesting point that you made, because during the Chester meeting, it was Arizari that said that law enforcement and kids entering the juvenile justice system, it starts with you guys. But obviously it goes way deeper than that. If people don't have access to resources and programs that they need, then they're going to start behaving out of the norm, I guess you could say, or even just getting involved in things that they actually have access to, which could be a danger to them. So, yeah, I think we will continue to talk more about that, of course, because this is not the route we want them to take.
Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned taking a holistic approach and getting to the root of the problem. And I think when so much focus is placed on a facility, we forget about everything else. So getting to the root means you need to be hiring all different types of behavioral specialists, mental health specialists, holistic wellness practitioners. I just watched a documentary, I forgot the name of it, that one of our colleagues shared with us the other day about what's going on with the children in the Chester Upland School District. And they had, in one of the schools, a mindfulness instructor. And me being a holistic practitioner, I actually understand this, but basically when a child or adolescent who doesn't have a fully developed brain yet, when they have all these emotions running through them that they can't even express, their brain goes into survival mode. So when they take an action, whether it's an outburst, a fight, they're not even thinking from a logical standpoint. Their brain is doing what it's naturally designed to do, which is fight or flight. So if a child is operating on pure survival or instincts, when they take an action like that, having mindfulness in place, helping them to center themselves, to meditate, to breathe, to switch that off and back into, a more logical state of mind, really helps. And if we could equip all children with that from an early age, we would definitely have less incidents, less violence happening with the youth. So we need to be hiring and training more professionals to do that type of work with kids, which, we could do that if we take $45 million and focus on things like that to address the root causes. And also having programs, resources for parents, because a lot of parents aren't equipped. If they were never taught, how can they teach their children? And then furthermore, a lot of parents are trying to make ends meet, working 2 or 3 jobs to keep a roof over their head. We don't have affordable housing in our communities. We have serious food insecurities in Delaware County. So if people are trying to make sure they're able to survive, they also can't watch their kids at the same time. So it's a lot of things going on that we could be addressing that are parts of the problem so that kids aren't going to get in trouble. Serge, you got any?
I mean, I don't know if can I just chime in or should I wait?
of course.
Yeah, so, because I have a lot to say to that. So, I have an issue with, so let me be clear here. I'm anti-police. And what I mean by that is I don't hate police. I just don't think police have to exist. But I'm not anti-people. So I like you and respect you in your human capacity. So I want to be clear about that. I don't like when people use terms like rehabilitate or reform as it relates to human beings, period, but in particular, children, because it implies that a child is born inherently flawed or evil or just like broken or something like that. Maleata, you said it that you spoke about how a person is not even developed, their brain isn't even developed fully into their mid-20s. So you have young people out here making juvenile, immature decisions. And sometimes those decisions cost people their lives. And that's just, it's a sad reality, but it's still coming from a person who is immature and can't really understand the full weight of their actions. This facility that is being built, yeah, the estimates are $36 to $45 million, but we're not even accounting for staff salaries and things like that as time goes by. And so this will be such a stain on the community. And it's so much more about this that's wrong. But I wanna speak about what you mentioned about the 15-year-old boy who was out at 1 o'clock in the morning with a gun and shot and killed somebody. The thing is this, was that a terrible thing? Absolutely. All loss of life is tragic and unnecessary. But where did he get the gun? First of all, I'm sure that he didn't go into a store and purchase it. You know, the gun issue, like Salim Holbrook often says, is not a district attorney issue. It's not even a police issue. The gun issue is a legislative issue. We have people who have the ability to stop access to guns, but they refuse to do it because they're controlled by the NRA and other special interest group, and even groups who have a stake in maintaining the violence in black and brown communities. So you have a young, immature person who somehow got their hands on a gun. You blame the parents, but what we fail to acknowledge is that a lot of parents have to work, you know, and it is humanly impossible to do all of these things, to work, to run a household, to sleep, to watch children. I was a child before, as I'm sure everybody up here was, and I grew up in a 2-parent household. And both of my parents were college graduates, served in the military, never been arrested or convicted of anything ever. And my first arrest came at, I think, 12. I owned my first firearm when I was 10. I was carrying a gun regularly to high school by the time I was 14. So it's not even a parent issue. We blame parents in our community because we're upset and we don't understand the issue. We have no answer to it. We don't think we do. And so we just sort of just like, well, lock them up and throw away the key. That's society's answer in America. But prison doesn't work. As people state often, if prison worked, then the United States would be the safest place on the planet, because we incarcerate more people than anybody on the planet. And the prisons are full of people who have committed violent felonies, and it still hasn't put a reduction in the violent crime rate. So I just wanted to say that. And I also, one more thing before I end. The irony in these discussions is that most people who come up here and advocate for prison or detention facilities will, in the same breath, acknowledge that the behavior of an individual isn't wholly their fault. They acknowledge the social conditions, they acknowledge the economic conditions, they acknowledge the violence in their communities and in their households, they acknowledge that there is a root cause to these problems, and yet and still want to punish these people for essentially doing something that we knew would result from the conditions that they grew up in. And so that is a sad irony and a contradiction that people in your position need to address, because it's sort of like speaking out of both sides of your mouth. And I'm not saying you specifically, I'm saying the community that you represent. And so I think that we have to get to the bottom of that as well. It's either their fault or it isn't. You know, simple as that.
Well, Serge, this actually took me back to one of your pieces on numbers don't lie, or do they? And the fact that I quote this all the time, that you don't have to be a negative statistic, but the fact that our kids aren't given that option, we don't even get second chances or even a first chance for a lot of them, because they're just expected to be out on the streets. Their lives are going to be just run by street behavior, violent behavior. The term thugs didn't just derive out of nowhere. And it still is used heavily today because millions of people are incarcerated right now. And why? Because one, they were targeted either for a crime they did or did not commit. Punishment always comes with trauma in this country. It just has to go hand in hand. So the fact that we continuously incarcerate people for decades on end, and we're not focusing on the root causes, and like you were saying, we have to actually stop saying that it's the parents' fault. They're not even given opportunities either to properly take care of their kids or their families. So it's like, where do we actually draw the line between what needs to change and what doesn't? So I'm curious to ask, because you said you don't really go with the terms rehabilitation or reform, so what are programs or just preventative measures that you would take or actually invest in to reduce behaviors like this?
Well, I think that you touched on it earlier in the program. Why should a person have to essentially go to prison to have access to a studio or a basketball court or a safe environment? You know, and to be clear, I don't care what those people made it look like when they did a tour of the facility. The trauma that will come from a juvenile being locked in a cage, that's what it is, a cage. I don't care, you know, how you wrap it up. You know what they say, put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig, you know. And the trauma that is associated, that results from being locked up, it outweighs that. I went to Glen Mills. I was sent to Glen Mills, and I was supposed to spend 12 months at Glen Mills. And a judge who was a common pleas judge now, of course they promoted her, she said I wasn't ready to leave. So I ended up spending 18 months at Glen Mills, and Glen Mills destroyed my life. It broke me mentally, emotionally, spiritually. You know, it caused me to lose hope. Glen Mills, from the outside looking in, is like an institute of higher learning. You know, you have all the programs, it has everything. You drive down the campus, people waving at you. But then when you get behind the doors, you're abused, physically, emotionally, some sexually. And we've been speaking out against that for years, and nobody believed us until Lisa Garter at Inquirer, credit to her, broke the story, the scandal, which ended up getting some people justice. Not for everybody, but for some. And so that that facility is sad. It shouldn't be built. The programs, what I think as far as violence reduction or violence intervention, whatever you want to call it, it starts in the community. We need resources to raise our families. We need resources to take pressure off of our parents, off of single mothers, single fathers, aunts, uncles, people who are raising children. You shouldn't have to work 8 hours a day and then have to come home and work more and then have to split what's left between sleeping and spending time with your family and teaching people the lessons that they need to survive. So we need to flip the money that's being spent on punishment needs to go into the community. The money that's being spent on hiring more police, more I guess units of control needs to go back into the community. That's the start right there.
Maleata, did you want to chime in with anything?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, someone being placed into a facility, just someone even getting arrested, that in itself is very traumatic. I do not tell people this often, but I was actually arrested at the age of 15, and that was probably like the most terrifying and dehumanizing thing that I've ever been through. I was a child, hanging with the wrong crowd. I was a child, but when they put those cuffs on me, they were treat me like I was a 40-year-old woman. And of course, it was white officers. I was in Willow Grove of all places. But it was a very traumatic experience. So, Chief, I want to ask you, being that you are the new leader in Yeadon, when it comes to interacting with the youth in the area, what are some things that you would like to do that's different, that makes, if you have to encounter a young person, if you're called to the high school, or if there is an incident, what are some things that you plan to do that are different that makes the experience far less traumatic?
I think breaking down the barriers, and we have one of the high schools asked for me to come out and said, hey, can you speak to the kids? And I was honest. I said, listen, your makeup of the high school doesn't look like me. So what I did is I reached out to coworkers from the Attorney General's office, former coworkers, and they have a group that looks like them, that looks like the black and brown community, and they're actually going to go into school and talk to the kids and kind of talk them on their level. When I talk, what I've been doing is going into the little schools and talking to the little kids, the elementary schools, and just, I want to reinstitute when we have manpower. I know you were saying you don't want us to hire more, but I'm telling you, I need to hire a lot more. And once we get that, I want a community police program. I want the PAL program, and we talked about PAL. I know some people don't like PAL, but PAL also breaks down that stigma. If I could snap my fingers and have it right now, I would have a community center, a multi-purpose community center, where I'd have the older people coming in the daytime, the younger kids coming in the afternoon, the police station in the middle, and all working together. And then my goal would be to get these older people, that were there and say, hey, you were a teacher before. Yeah. Well, how about you come in the afternoon and help mentor and breaking down the bridges? And one of the things I'm working on fervently is to try to get a police department that looks like the community we serve. Yeadon Borough, as you know, is 88.7% African descent. We need to diversify the police department. One of the problems we have is we hire what's called certified police officers. There are people that have an Act 120. To be a police officer in Pennsylvania, you need an Act 120. It's $59.50 to go, $5,950 to pay for yourself. Most people can't afford that. So I'm working with council, and I are going to work together to try to come up with a plan where we can start hiring from Yeadon itself, from surrounding counties and surrounding areas that look like the people they're going to serve. And that's important. And that's, people see that and they can relate and they can talk about it. I'm telling you right now, I don't know what it is to be black. I've never had to walk in anywhere and think, I'm being judged on the color of my skin. And I really don't, and I keep in my police hat, my daughter wrote me a letter on June 8th, 2020, after the whole George Floyd murder. My daughter and I raised my children in such a way, my wife and I, where we showed, like, we just, raised love and, hey, everything's hunky-dory. Well, my daughter said to me after we had a good conversation, Dad, you don't know what it is to be judged the way you look. You don't know because you are not black. You love us, we're your children, but you don't know. And now I have, my grandsons are black grandsons. I have black grandsons. So that's something that I realized that I have to work better. I have to be better. I have to get in the community. We have to have these meetings. We have to have honest dialogue. Like, we might not agree on certain stuff, but I know you want to be safe, but you also have a right to feel safe and be safe. And that's something I'm stealing from the governor. You said it all the time when I was on his protection detail. And when he would tell people, like, look, you have a right to feel safe, but also be safe. I have a different, I still get stopped, and my wife laughs. Every time I get stopped by the cops, I still put my hands on the steering wheel, and officer, I have a gun, blah, blah. But when my daughter goes out, my oldest daughter goes out with her husband, he looks like me. I'm like, hey, just be safe. When the youngest goes out with her husband, who looks like y'all, I'm like, when you get stopped, make sure you do your hand. And that shouldn't be that way. And that's stuff that we did wrong in the industry and in our career, and we're trying to evolve. And I think you get more open-minded people that will have discussions and talk out these topics, and we can, we can build bridges. I mean, you and I might not agree on everything, but I mean, at the end of the day, I want to make sure you're safe. I want to make sure your family's safe, and it has to be that way. But we have to really have dialogue like this, like honest dialogue. Break it down and discuss it and move on and just get stuff done. And we have to also recognize what was done in the past, what was done, like what my chosen career did in the past. I have to recognize that, and realize not to commit that again and keep working together. And the kids, I mean, I hate to use another song lyric, but like Whitney said, children are the future. Like, we have to invest in the future. That's our future. They're going to be taking care of us, changing my diapers when I'm in Shady Acres nursing home in years. Like, they're going to be taking care of us. They're going to be our future leaders. Like, we have to invest in the youth. And that's why I said, like, you and I, we're going to disagree, but that 42 million can be better served. Spend 5 million if you have to build, because I hate to say it, winter's, I'm going to use another corny line, but winter's coming. No matter what we all say, no matter what we all do, I think they're hell-bent on building this facility, but maybe they'll break off a lot of funding to go back to the communities where it should be, to have programs, to have somebody like you run a program. I mean, you could talk to these youth, and I'm sure you do, and you have a story to tell them. Like, I have a very good friend that I would like to get in here. He grew up in North Philly. I think he was eight in his family. He was homeless. He became, as he jokes around, he became a JCPenney store detective. Then he became a Pennsylvania trooper. Now he's a PhD. He teaches. He rose, but he would always tell me, he's like, man, he would tell me the stories of growing up, and he can relate. But you need people to relate and people to get into the community. And I think what you're doing, like I said, we might not agree on everything, but I know where your heart's at. I can see where your heart's at, and that's a heart for service.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So for people who don't know really what I'm doing, I'm assistant to the executive director of the Abolitionist Law Center, and among many other things. And so these are issues that we face daily, that we work to address daily. And one of the things that I want to respond to is this term, community policing, which has been, in my opinion, appropriated for purposes of manipulation and control of our communities. Community policing doesn't mean that the community gets familiar with the police and they walk down the street, oh, how you doing, Harry? Come have a cup of coffee and a donut. No, that's not community policing. Community policing is community members having the resources, the skill, the training, the ability to police themselves and their own community without an external occupying force coming in military style with vehicles, with weapons, with training, with everything that you would see in a battle zone in Afghanistan. And so people use that term community policing, and it's confusing to a lot of members of our community. They think that it means something that it really doesn't. And like I said, I'm against the existence of police. I'm not against the existence of people. So, with that said, nothing pure can come from something impure. The police were created to commit impure acts. They were created to catch human beings who were enslaved and who chose to not accept their terms of enslavement and escape slavery. The police were a creation. They were a force that was created to enslave people. And we tend to forget that we are only a couple generations removed from slavery. And the police, in my opinion, cannot be made to be pure. There's no way. There's too much history. There's too much trauma. There's too much pain. There's never going to be trust between the police and black and brown communities. I don't care if the entire police force was black and brown, because the ideology is still white supremacy. And there is a such thing as black white supremacists. If you espouse that ideology, then it doesn't matter what the color of your skin is. So I just don't believe that we need police in our communities. I think that we are big enough and grown enough and intelligent enough and responsible enough to handle our own issues. This facility is a waste. I'm gonna tell you what's gonna happen. All you have to do is look at Philadelphia, 2000, maybe 13 or 14. The state refused to give Philly, I think it was about $300 million because to fund the schools. Because they didn't get that $300 million, they were forced to shut down 29 schools. Instead of getting them the $300 million, they took that and added another $100 million or so to it and built the new state-of-the-art prison in Montgomery County, SCI Phoenix. What happened is what we're seeing now, the violence that we're seeing now, the crime that we're seeing now committed by young people, these are the young people who were ousted. These are the young people who missed out from those after-school programs. These are the young people who are grown now. Not grown, but these are the young people who are now in their late teens, early 20s, who could have been saved but were abandoned by the people who were charged with protecting them. So that very same formula is going to be followed out here in Chester or Delaware County with that same facility, guaranteed. Watch.
So I want to ask, and this is actually for both of you, but we'll start with the chief first. If, let's say the county decided, you know what, we're not going to reopen this facility, we're not going to build a new one. Instead, we're going to give this money to community leaders. What solutions would you like to create? What programs for the youth and for parents would you then put in place so that we're reducing violent incidences, we're keeping kids out of trouble, giving them something better to do with their time? Like, what would that look like?
My perfect world, we would definitely have recreation centers, because it's important to get kids out, get them involved, but also life skill training, like we were talking, like we kind of all mentioned with the parenting. I was 20 when I had our first child, 19 was my wife, and we didn't know, like we didn't have that family unit. I came from a broken household, single parent, she came from a single parent, but we worked together. I mean, we stumbled like everyone, and you were talking about jobs. I'm telling you, my whole life, full-time job, part-time job. My wife worked a full-time job. I understand what you're talking about, and thank God I had 2 girls that, because girls are a lot easier to deal with than boys, which, my girls are successful, but it's work. But you have to have those skills, like how to balance a checkbook, like, how to raise a child, how to take care of a child. And maybe abstinence program, like, don't be afraid to tell kids, like, hey, if you want to have sex, like, strap up, like, if you want to do this, like, have women's right to choose. Like, I mean, that's stuff we need to really look at, like programs that are going to work. And it's all about community. But have, like, this gentleman here who's involved with the community, you all involved with the community, have come back to the community and work in the community. And community involvement's huge. I mean, it really, truly takes a village. I mean, it's, we hear all the time when the grandmoms were running the streets, yelling like, yo, get your butt home or you're going to get, that's what you need. I grew up in a neighborhood where everyone knew each other, right? I'll tell you right, I still remember my house. Miss Elizabeth was on the right. Miss Wanda was on the left. Across the street was Mr. Jefferson. We all knew each other. If I screwed up, it got back home, right? It got back home. Now it's like no one knows each other. Like, I live in an area now where no one, like, I know my next door neighbor, my other next door neighbor, we have battles about fencing. Like everybody wants to live in their silos. Like, you almost need that, we need a community. You need a village, and you need people to work together. But if I had my way, you know what I want. I'm not bashful. Yeadon needs a rec center.
And Serge, actually, before you chime in, I did just want to comment on what you said about community involvement. I feel like we always will have to address that barrier that prevents that from happening, because yes, with people like us, we're going to continue to push for it. But when we have people in power that don't want that or have that same vision, it's going to become 1,000 times harder. Like, I know we mentioned the DA. Pretty sure everyone knows how I feel about the DA and his office and just how he moves in general. But there are people that do come to them about ways to keep kids out of the justice system, because actually the injustice system, because there's nothing good that comes out of that with people of color. And just the fact that they're just like, oh, well, we're actually secretly working on this facility, but we're gonna, in the meantime, do youth aid panels. Youth aid panels weren't successful 2 years ago when they attempted that. And yet they're continuing to push kids of color into some type of interaction with law enforcement or just people that can be triggering for them. So I feel like, yes, we're going to continue to try to do better for our residents, for our kids, and for our community in general. But when we have people in power that just don't have that same vision, it's probably just going to be a lot harder for that to ever happen.
Yeah, and those people in power, it doesn't just end with the people that are running the county. Some of these people in power with the school districts right now are a problem. They are blocking things from taking place because they are so hell-bent on having control and power that they're not willing to do what's best for our children. And that's a problem. That's frustrating. That's not serving the kids. So I don't even know why they're in their positions in the first place. It's a mess. So more people would be involved if they were fully aware of the problems and how they could help. So actually putting information out there is helpful. And then also people who are in power not being the actual barrier. So more people can be involved because they put up so much of a fight. People are just like, forget it, like, I tried. But yeah, Serge, what things would you do, like, put in place if someone gave them money, like, tomorrow? What things would you start putting in place?
Well, first, I want to say what you all just stated is exactly the reason why I became an organizer with the Working Families Party, because these values are working families' values, which is why I work with State Representative Carol Kazim so much, because she is a force, she is a power, she is a champion for working families, and why hopefully William Jones will be elected in Chester as well. But what I would do, all we have to do is look at communities that aren't suffering like we're suffering, and ask ourselves, what is the difference between this community and my community? First, I don't think anybody in Willow Grove is or in these affluent neighborhoods, they're not renting their homes. They're on a pathway to home ownership, which is the number one indicator of creating generational wealth. Black and brown people are being forced out of the community. They're being forced to rent, and there are no rent laws. There's no caps on what people can charge for rent. We need to be able to own something. When I was in prison, I tell people this all the time, and I spent over 2 decades in prison. The first half of my prison's time that I spent in prison, the first half of my sentence was spent being much more of what I was on the street, being violent, being just angry, bitter, just being like not a pleasure to be around. And then things started to change, and I started to earn certificates. I started to earn a better reputation. I earned the trust of staff, things like that. And I realized that I don't want to lose these things that I earn. When you give a person something to earn, they will not want to lose it. The young people are behaving the way they're behaving for a lot of reasons, but one of the biggest reasons is because they feel hopeless. They don't have anything to lose. We need to take that money and put people in our communities on the path to home ownership, to economic independence, financial stability. We need to be able to take care of ourselves. And we can't do that right now because we have a forced dependency. And it started since the end of slavery, when it was just like, okay, you're free. Go do whatever you want now. And there were barriers in place on purpose. And one of those barriers being redlining. Everybody's familiar with that, and we still suffer from the effects of that. But that is the first thing that we need to do. If our goal is to eliminate crime, to be safe, then we need to invest in the communities. And that's why I say that people turn their nose up when you say, oh, I'm an abolitionist. Oh, he's about defunding police. And I tell people, if you really believe in what you say you believe in, and you think about what you say you believe in, then you would be an abolitionist as well, because you should want to live in a society where you don't need police. You should want to live in a society where you don't need prisons. And we once had a society where we didn't need police. We once had a society where we didn't need prisons. I keep telling people these are relatively new phenomena that we're dealing with. So we didn't have it before, and we can once again not have it. But I just think that that money needs to go into programs, not just to teach people trades and not just to educate people, but we need to give people a boost. And I'm not talking about a $1,000 stimulus check. I'm talking about we need home ownership, we need property, we need generational wealth, and that, in my opinion, is the start.
So when it comes to bringing youth to the table in general, just to have these conversations, just how would you encourage them to actually speak up? Because it's not easy to just speak on things that's going on in their personal lives, or just what they're struggling with and what they don't have, and just how they're feeling in general. Because kids do talk when they're comfortable, and when those spaces are created for them to actually come to the table and where their voices are heard and respected. So with a scenario like this, with this facility in general, how can we actually bring them to the table and get them involved in conversations like this to let them know that what they want and need matters? And that's exactly what we're trying to push for.
Me?
That's geared towards just anyone.
Oh yeah, I go real quick. we have to stop saying, yo, here's a panel, come show up. You got to meet people where they are. You know, like, we if we care, if we want to get people listening, we want to get people involved, then we can't ask them to do our job for us. Like, we have to go to them, meet them where they are, talk to them on their terms, and then they'll open up, because they'll be comfortable enough to talk to us on their terms, on their turf, on their territory, whatever you want to call it. Simple as that to me.
Anyone else want to chime in?
I agree. I mean, you can't, like, how many meetings, sometimes we just have meetings to have meetings, just to set up other meetings where you want to kind of, like you said, and social media, I mean, let's face it, you have teenagers, they're in their phones 99% of the day, but stop by the schools when the kids are walking out. I mean, they walk down Bailey Road all the time. Just get out and go talk to them. Like, what do you want? Like, and I'm guarantee you they're going to want a place to go play basketball or go. We were talking about boxing or some kind of activity after school, not just go to home, go in their house and just hang out. I mean, an idle mind's a devil's workshop. And let's face, we were all at that. When I had nothing to do when I was 14, I was dangerous. Like, because you have nothing to do. Like, but if I had structure, we all want structure. I don't care. I mean, I think the human form wants structure. Once you get structure, you there has to be structure. So meet them where they are, right? Meet them where they are, or they're at.
Yeah. For me, and I said this at the Chester community meeting that the county had, until they start actually having conversations with the youth, with children, with the people that they want to put in these facilities, everything that they're doing is performative, is bullshit. It doesn't matter, because what they think, how they feel, what they'll tell you they need help with, that's all that matters. That's what's important. And kids will tell you if you ask them. And also, if they know you're actually going to listen. A lot of these school administrators, officials, they don't talk to the kids, they're talking at the kids. When they get feedback from the kids, they're not listening. I had kids tell me back in the fall, like, they did a protest at Penwood and they were upset because no one was listening, and they were struggling with math curriculum, of all things. It's not they didn't care, it's not they didn't want to pass their class, it didn't make sense for a lot of kids, and they weren't being heard. So if people really are about helping these children, y'all got to start listening to them, period. Like, the fact that they're having community meetings and not one has had children in it yet is ridiculous. I know that the Child Center, the Center for Child Law and Policy is supposed to be doing a survey with kids in the county, up to 500 children. They haven't done it yet. They're looking to partner with a community org, but 500 kids, when Penwood alone has, the high school alone has 1,200 kids. Like, 500 kids it's not a good representation of all the children in the county. So they really need to do better with that, for sure. But we got to start having these conversations with the children, for sure.
And also, now that I think about it, when the survey was even mentioned at the community meeting, I did directly ask them, so besides just a written document on what these kids are asking for, what's the actual direct action that's going to be taken with the kids? Like, are you going to actually be interacting with them? Are you going to be visiting the schools? What's going to be the actual action? There were 3 Delaware County Council members there that night: Kevin Madden, Elaine Schaefer, and Monica Taylor. Elaine and Monica, they're both up for re-election. They just looked at me, crickets. And I was like, okay. So then Arizari just pitched in and just moved on with the questions. But again, like, we have Monica serving on the State Board for Education, and Elaine, who lives in Radnor. Of course, she's not really going to know much about what it's like to go to school in an underfunded community. But if you're telling the people you're going to directly work on increasing literally just how they're behaving out in these streets, and not increasing, decreasing that, and you're not even willing to have those conversations about what's actually going on with them, then what are we even here for? You're asking for feedback when you're already saying this facility is going to be coming regardless in 2 years. So what is being done in the meantime? We still have a 2-year timeline, and there's still no answers or direct action that they can give.
Yeah. In my private conversation with Monica Taylor, because although I addressed her publicly, she waited till I was out of the room to respond privately, which that's a problem, but okay. When talking about what the kids needed, and specifically William Penn School District, since that's where I'm a parent, I mentioned to her the Safe Corridors program, how they're about to start it at Academy Park High School because it's done so well here at a school in Chester Upland District. And I told her the costs that are potentially associated with it, and like it should really be in every school. She seems interested in the idea, but is she going to help us get the funding for that? Because we already know our school districts are underfunded, and even though they ruled it unconstitutional, it could be years before we actually see that money. So we definitely need the public's help in holding these officials accountable to all these promises they make, all the things they run on when it's election season, and then they just conveniently forget about it. It's super, super, super frustrating. David Irizarry would like to start touring some of the schools. He definitely wants to come to William Penn School Districts. Oddly enough, the problem with getting him into our districts to talk to people, talk to administrators, teachers, counselors, students, look at the buildings, see what we need to keep them secure and safe, but also to actually help our students. The barrier with that is our lovely superintendent. I had a conversation with people at the school district over a month ago, actually, and every time I've seen David since, which is about 3 or 4 times, he says, I haven't heard from your school district yet. So now I'm like, well, damn, do they give a damn about my kids and their friends and all the kids coming up behind them? Doesn't seem like it. We have people saying, hey, we'll come see how we can help. And now they're not opening the door. It's ridiculous. At this point, and I've had school district members tell me that only violently criminal children will be in this facility. Like, the last word in that sentence was children. Are you kidding? Like, why don't we address why they become violent in the first place?
But I don't mean to cut you off. I just want to ask this question. What is locking somebody up going to prove? What is it going to stop? What is it going to change? What does punishment do?
Well, according to the CDC, it's not helpful at all. It doesn't help.
Right. So why is it still being used? You know, it's just like solitary confinement in prison. There are men and women who have been in solitary confinement for decades, and experts say that solitary confinement is torture. They say that it doesn't work. It makes people more violent. It exacerbates mental health issues, and in those who don't have mental health issues previous to their confinement, it creates them. You know, so you know, you lock a person up, a violent person, and then it proves nothing. Just society just gets to say we put them in prison, and that's a brownie point for society.
And the last couple of meetings, I got super angry, super emotional, because first and foremost, I'm a mom. I have 2 teenage boys. One just turned 18, one to be 17 this summer. Of course, as a mom to Black children, I have a lot of concerns and worries. But also, I was a teenager that started going down the wrong path. When I was 14, 15, I was exposed to a lot of trauma, sexual assaults, mental and emotional abuse from my mother, all types of things. And me being a teenager, not knowing how to get mental health services for something like that, or even tell people what was going on, although I did try to tell some people and they ignored me because, well, that's your mom, right? But I started hanging with certain people, either getting kicked out the house or being or running away from home, getting arrested, doing things that I should not have been doing, had access to all types of things that I shouldn't have access to as a teenager. But That's what it is when you're on the streets, right? Got into a couple of situations, one which led to me being arrested because of what other people were doing, but a couple of incidents where I probably should have been arrested, but by the grace of God, the adults that I encountered gave me grace. They showed empathy. And I think the most powerful thing someone ever did for me during that time period, instead of calling the police or doing other things, this one woman didn't know me, but she hugged me. A hug probably saved my life. I had a music teacher realize this is not who you are, you're not a bad child, I don't know what's going on. Came in for a music lesson. She hugged me. Those hugs literally saved my life because if I had kept going, I probably would have been killed, kidnapped, worse. So it makes me really sad and also really angry that there is really no empathy shown from our elected officials when it comes to children. None.
Because they use children as pawns, because most children don't know how to defend themselves against it and can't articulate what they feel. And so this is one of the reasons they act out. And I know this because, like I said before, I was once a child. And so I know how I responded to that type of stuff. You know, when I was younger, they tried to put me in a special class for people who had learning disabilities because I was fidgety in class. So they gave me the little test and all that, and then they figured out that I had a higher IQ than they thought, and they ended up starting to bus me to high school in the 3rd grade, busing me to high school twice a week. So children are misunderstood, young people are misunderstood and can't express themselves in the way that we as adults can express ourselves. And I think a lot of times the adult versions of us tend to judge the child version of us harshly, and it leads back to what you said, empathy, having empathy, understanding. That's what we need to get back to, these elected officials who people know how I feel about these career politicians out here, not just out here, but in Philly as well, and around the state. But what's going on out here is a mess. I attended a couple of y'all meetings out here. It's a mess. It's sad. I tell the grown-ups out here, y'all need to grow up because it is really, really, really sad. And if that's what leadership looks like out here, those are the people that you need to be putting officers around right there. It's not the young people. You can't expect the young people to act mature if the adults aren't acting mature. And I recorded it, so it's not my opinion. I couldn't believe what I was saying. So I just said, I'm recording this stuff because nobody's gonna believe me when I tell them this. But I'm not here to point fingers. I'm here to say, look, I know what we need. I know what our community needs, and it doesn't need a $45 million facility. All that's going to do is create more detainees. It's going to create more jobs, which means there's going to be more of an argument for it, and there's going to be more political support for it because those jobs bring money and bring economic support. It's just like with prisons. It used to be a time where these counties in rural Pennsylvania didn't want prisons in their backyard. They were against it until the coal industry and other industries, steel industry and all that started to fail, and all of a sudden prisons were the savior. And now they advocate openly for prisons to not just stay open but to be built. So it's just all unfortunately a game that they're playing with people's lives.
Yeah. So I think the biggest takeaway, we're all in agreement that the biggest help for these issues would be making sure that parents and kids have access to programs, they have access to resources, things that are truly going to make a long-term positive impacts on their lives is what is sorely needed in Delaware County and beyond, because this is happening not just in Delaware County, but in every low-income neighborhood, underfunded school district, any urban area where there are predominantly Black and brown children, which, of course, systemic racism plays a huge role in all of these things. Moving forward, we need more people in the community to get involved. Like, if y'all haven't been going to local meetings, whether it's the Board of Managers meetings for the juvenile facility, your local council meeting, your home and school meetings, y'all who are available and able need to start showing up. Most of these meetings are available online if you can't go in person, but you really need to know what's going on, because if you sit back and do nothing, you don't get involved, you're gonna wake up one day and there's gonna be things in place that you're gonna have a problem with, and it's gonna be too late to do anything because the time to take action passed. Any closing
I
thoughts?
agree. And I just want to say there actually is an alternative solution for this facility out there. There's literally funding for that. It's not nearly as much. It's only $650K that the county has allocated towards that. But of course, they're not addressing it because we already know where they stand with it. They want this facility no matter what we say, what our thoughts are, and they're going to continue to push for that. But just Surge in our movement spaces out in Philly, one thing we always talk about is people power. It is a powerful thing. We can do a lot, and accomplish a lot of change if we continue to push that narrative for the things that we want. Not even demand anymore, but just literally say, you are required to do this. We voted you in. We can do the same thing now with voting you out. And I think we need to continue to push for that, especially with election season coming up. A vote, it matters, but so do our voices. So I do just want to say, with that alternative out there, we can continue to ask questions about that and push for more information for that, just because, like Maleata was saying, we deserve these answers and all of these updates.
So thank you so much for taking time out on a Friday night. Once again, we have Chief Henry Giammarco from Yeadon Police Department and our guy, Sergio Hyland, aka Uptown Surge, the Hood Abolitionist. It's been a pleasure chatting with you both. Thank you for sharing your viewpoints and your perspectives.
Likewise.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Yeah, just let the people know how they can stay in touch with you guys or just follow up with everything that you're doing.
You have all those cool handles. So
Nah,
I'm the simple old man email. You have all that cool.
Got one handle. Follow me on Instagram at Uptown Surge. One word. UPTOWNSERG.
You can go on MySpace. I'm sorry, MySpace account. No, I'm like no. Giammarco, GIAMMARCO at YeadonPD.org. And thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you guys for coming on. Well, it's a wrap, y'all. This was our second episode of What's News Delco, and we'll tune in with you guys next month.
Yes, make sure y'all follow us on Instagram and Facebook to stay up to date on any announcements of what's going on around Delaware County, community meetings, events, all that good stuff.
Good night, y'all.
CMPRadio.net, the voice of Chester.